Greetings everyone! This is a quick promo before the video begins. If you're new to the channel and you didn't know it yet, I am actually an author in addition to being a YouTuber, and I have 2 books that you can get on Amazon. Operation Red Dragon: The Daikaiju Wars Part 1 and The Occult Mafia. The first is sort of a bizarre, absurdist kaiju anime mashup, and the other is a horror noir story with a hint of a western thrown in there. They're both set in the same universe, and at this point have received mostly positive reviews, so you might want to check them out. I've provided Amazon links for both of them down in the description. They're both available in either paperback or Amazon Kindle, and Operation Red Dragon is also available in audiobook form. So if either of these strike your fancy and you want to support a struggling artist, feel free to go down and check out either one or both of them. Alright, the shameless self-promotion is out of the way, we can get on with the video. Thank you all for your support. Hello ladies and gentlemen, I am the Omniviewer, and as I'm sure you've all heard by now, Godzilla Singular Point is real. The new anime project is not a fan animation, nor is it a hoax. It is a genuine, officially licensed Toho anime based on Godzilla. To be animated, of course, by Studio Bones and Orange. We know a little bit about what's going on behind the scenes. We don't really have much in the way of detail yet. The most we've gotten is a look at Godzilla from the neck up, and a look at the human cast. And of course, this title logo. But we don't know much else beyond that, which means it's time for speculating. Well, actually no, I'm not going to speculate. Rather, I'm going to lay out my criteria for what I want to see in this series. Because the last time we got a Godzilla anime, it was awful. And it completely missed the point. It was one of the worst representations of Godzilla ever committed to film at all. And I know that sounds like hyperbole, but I genuinely do mean it. I think that it's the bottom of the barrel. At least I hope it's the bottom of the barrel, because my word, if it's possible to be worse than that, I do not want to see it. So obviously the underlying criteria for Godzilla Singular Point is be better than the Polygon trilogy, which I intend to henceforth refer to those movies as in order to distinguish it. Referring to it as the anime trilogy was fine when it was the only Godzilla anime. Now that there's going to be more, we need a way to distinguish it. It was animated by Polygon. I propose that we now call it the Polygon trilogy. But I'll let the masses decide whether or not that's what catches on. Anyway, getting back on point, the underlying sentiment is of course that this should be better than the Polygon trilogy, but that's way too generalized of a criteria. So I'm going to get a little more specific, and I'm going to lay out what I think Singular Point needs to do in order to function as a proper Godzilla anime. So here we go. My first criteria, get the pacing right. And this is vital. It may seem like a weird thing to start with, because it's like, well, wait a minute, I thought he was going to start with like something to do with Godzilla or the human characters. But I do feel like pacing should be mentioned. Because, well, pacing is actually a problem that a lot of streaming shows have these days. And this is going to be streaming on Netflix. Assuming Netflix survives after the indictment involving cuties. But that's a whole other topic. You see, the way your average streaming show is designed is not as an episodic series, but as a marathon-length movie broken into segments. So it doesn't tell a story and end right as the credits roll so that the next story can begin in the next episode. It sets up, it might tell its own story, I suppose, but at the same time, it leaves a lot of room for stuff to happen in the next episode, which leaves a lot of room for stuff to happen in the episode after that, so on down the line. This is because the streaming services want you to binge watch these shows. They want you to stick around as long as you can and keep watching for as long as you're able to, I guess, because everyone has to either use the bathroom or go to sleep at some point. But this has led to some issues. Even with the greatest of streaming shows, you do occasionally get issues. One of the most glaring issues that often arises from this format is padding. Now, whenever a production company orders a season of a TV series or a streaming series, they order a specific number of episodes. We're going to give you the funds to make this number of episodes to fill these slots during this particular season, spring, summer, fall, winter, whenever it airs, and you have to fill all of them. And the problem arises if your writing staff is coming up with the overarching story that will want to keep viewers coming back for more as the credits roll, but sometimes you don't have enough story to fill all of those slots. Sometimes you find yourself coming up short, but you need to fill the slots because that's what you're getting paid for, so you gotta find a way to fill them, and that often leads to inserting episodes that are weird side tangents that are either setting something up for a next season that might not come, or it's just a side story that goes nowhere and is basically a distraction from the main plot. With Godzilla Singular Point, it's going to be an anime. The average season length for anime these days is 12 episodes. So let's assume that there are 12 episodes that will premiere. That's not an official number. I don't have anything to prove that. I'm just going on an assumption based on what I know. So let's assume we have those 12 episodes. There might be a problem if the story, if it goes for an overarching story, but it's only got 8 episodes worth of story content, and it has 4 left that it needs to fill. Now, one way that you could get around this is to actually start out episodically and gradually abandon that as you get closer to the ending. So maybe start out as Monster of the Week and have the plot naturally build over time. Or you can just go full episodic and not worry about having an overarching plot at all. I don't necessarily care how it's done. I just want this to be a consistent show from beginning to end. Make sure you've got enough story, enough content to fill the episode count, however long it may be. In fact, this pacing issue also happens with the Polygon trilogy, both in terms of internal content for each film, from going from dragging its feet to suddenly having a full throttle action sequence, to the fact that I'm pretty sure City on the Edge of Battle was padding from beginning to end. How else do you explain the fact that the ending was basically a recycled version of the first film's conclusion? But that's beside the point. The ultimate point is, if Godzilla Singular Point is going to succeed as a series, it needs to have good pacing and enough content to actually fill everything. So that's why I made that the first item on my list. Next item on my list, good human characters, which was sorely lacking in the Polygon trilogy. I mean, what did we get? We got a protagonist who was constantly angry and completely unlikable. We got a villain who was obviously a villain and was only intriguing because of what we didn't know about him in the first 2 movies, and everyone else may as well have been a paper cutout glued to a popsicle stick for all that it mattered. There wasn't really any substance to be had there. Heck, the characters didn't even have all that interesting of an aesthetic to them. I mean, look at the crowd scenes. How many of those characters in the background are just the same model repasted over and over again with an opaque visor so you can't tell who's underneath it? Now, in terms of visuals, Singular Point already has a lot going for it because just look at that spread. We've got a pretty wide visual range here, but visuals alone are not enough. You need to actually have personalities to go with those visuals. And just looking at these designs, I can guess the personalities, or at least the baseline personalities of some of these characters, but not necessarily all of them. And who knows? Looks can be deceiving. The ultimate point, however, is that we need to have characters that actually can be connected with. Part of the reason why so many people don't like Haruo is because he's one note. He is so angry and so fixated on Godzilla that it feels like he doesn't have anything else to him. In fact, if you followed my coverage of the Polygon Trilogy, you would know that I don't actually think the Polygon Trilogy has characters in it. I rather see them as constructs, mouthpieces through which Gen Urobuchi spouts his nihilism rhetoric. They're not actual characters. And they're just there so they can move the plot forward and occasionally spout the theme of the movie in no uncertain terms for you. That's actually another thing. These characters need to be their own personalities, of course, but if they're going to say stuff, if they're going to express a particular outlook, a particular philosophy that might matter to the writers, it's gotta be natural. You can't just have them be a particular kind of character at one point and then suddenly switch that off so they can say what the writer thinks they should say. They've got to have that occur naturally. If there's going to be some sort of message, it has to be delivered by a character who actually would deliver it, and it's got to be a natural part of the whole story. It's got to be something that you would say based on those events. Of course, if Singular Point is just pure escapism, I have no problem with that, and that won't actually be an issue, because you won't need to be trying to figure out how to insert that message. There would be no message to insert. If there is, though, and I'm not opposed to that idea, it cannot conflict with the personalities of these characters. Otherwise, why even bother having them be characters at all? My third criteria naturally flows from the second one. Remember that Godzilla and whatever other monsters might show up are also characters. You see, the fact that kaiju have personalities is part of why people are drawn to this genre, because it's not just watching a mindless natural disaster, it's watching an intelligent being. Godzilla is a clearly defined personality. It's varied throughout the years, sure. Sometimes he's been a hero, sometimes he's been a villain, sometimes he's been somewhere in between, sometimes he's been pure evil, sometimes he's been more of an anti-villain or an anti-hero. But whatever the case, you can always look and see what his baseline personality is. He is tough, he never backs down from a fight, he will attack anything and anyone that he deems a threat to him, and if he gets knocked down, he'll be back eventually. If not by the end of the movie, then by the beginning of the next. And that's just like the baseline off the top of my head assessment. That was lost in the Polygon Trilogy. In fact, I believe the Polygon Trilogy is proof positive that you could not base a franchise off of Shin Godzilla. The Godzilla as portrayed in Shin has no personality. If he's not just walking forward, he's standing still. If he's not blasting a single attack all at once, he's out of energy and needs to take an extended nap. Whether or not it works in context of that particular film, we can discuss another day. But the fact is, the Polygon Trilogy took that and not only ran with it for Godzilla, it applied it to all of the other monsters. They also have that same baseline of just being things that move forward, attack what's in front of them, and are inactive when they're not doing that. And this results in the least interesting interpretations of 4 otherwise popular Toho monsters. Godzilla is a landmark, Mechagodzilla is a location, Ghidorah is a ghost, and Mothra is a shadow in a dream. And they barely do anything. Mothra especially, she really got screwed. I mean, sure, she doesn't get much screen time in King of the Monsters, but at least she actually does stuff in King of the Monsters. But when you look back even at the first appearances of these characters, they each have their own distinct personalities. Godzilla in the 1954 film is angry and in pain, and he's lashing out at a world that he thinks attacked him. Mothra is benevolent and will not intentionally harm anyone, but only if you haven't done anything to warrant it. She is acting out of a sense of altruism against people who are only looking out for themselves. Ghidorah is the ultimate destroyer. He destroys not because he feels attacked, but because he wants to attack. That's what he does. He enjoys it. He gets his kicks from it. And Mechagodzilla, I know a lot of people say that Mechagodzilla doesn't have a personality. In his very first film, he does. It's the personality of a robot, sure, but it's a personality. He is intelligent and autonomous. He receives commands, but it's up to him how he interprets those commands, and he does so in some pretty creative and sadistic ways. So that points to him having a good, intelligent programming, and a sadistic personality programming to boot. None of that is on display in the Polygon trilogy. So since those 3 movies missed the point, I'm hoping that Singular Point gets the point. I'm hoping to see a Godzilla that actually does have a personality. And should any other monsters show up, I hope that they have personalities as well, because that's what we want to see. If we wanted to just see mindless objects that cause destruction, we would watch movies like Twister, or the Monolith Monsters, or The Perfect Storm. Those are natural disaster movies, and they're not necessarily bad, but they're not kaiju movies. They don't deliver the same thing as a kaiju movie. The whole reason the kaiju genre exists is because kaiju can function as characters, and that's what we build our fandom around. I don't want to sound like one of the fans who doesn't care about the humans and only cares about the monsters. I just did a whole point about why we need good human characters, but at the same time, it's not the human characters we get Bandai figures of. It's the monsters. And we don't just get those figures because the monsters look cool. You get a figure of a particular monster for your collection, it's not just because of the design, I guarantee it. It's because you like that monster in its entirety. You like its design, you like its personality as well. Speaking of the monsters, that brings me to my 4th and final criteria, which is actually something I also said in regards to the Monsterverse way back. I want to see a mix of new and old kaiju. I have no doubt in my mind that Singular Point is probably going to bring in Mothra, Ghidorah, and Mechagodzilla, because that's always what happens. When the Heisei series came along, when the Millennium series came along, heck, even with the Monsterverse, it seems like those are the monsters that are getting prioritized. They'll do a couple of movies that have some new monsters in them, and then suddenly, gotta bring in Mothra, gotta bring in Ghidorah, gotta bring in Mechagodzilla. And I understand why. They're the top sellers. They're the ones that Toho can sell the most merchandise of because they're really popular. I do get it. But I also want to see some new monsters as well. And I want to see some monsters that maybe don't get as much screen time. I mean, we all remember how in Polygon they had this vast history built up for the timeline about all of the classic monsters showing up in some capacity or another. Hedorah being a genetically engineered weapon that goes rogue. Rodan and Anguirus being among the first kaiju to appear. Armies of Varans. Space Godzilla showing up at one point. And none of them are in the movies at all. They're all relegated to those novels that people tell me are better, but at the same time, I shouldn't have to read them in order to get my fix. That should have been the movie's job. And yet the opening montage for Planet of the Monsters thought that Dogora and Dagora were worth showing on screen. 2 monsters that didn't even have anything to do with Godzilla. Try and wrap your head around that one. Actually, no, I don't want to sound like I'm knocking those 2. If you could actually bring them into this anime, that would be pretty cool. I think that Dogora especially could really benefit from having animation applied to it, because it's this weird jellyfish-looking monster. The original effects in the original Dogora looked great, don't get me wrong, but imagine what you could do with animation. That would be pretty neat. But at the same time, take a risk. Bring in some new characters. You never know what might happen. I mean, look at what happens in comic book movies. Every time we get a new Batman reboot, you know the Joker is going to show up, and that's okay. We like seeing Batman go up against the Joker because that's part of the whole mythology. But when was the last time we got a new Batman character? Well, when we did, it really left an impact. That was back in the 90s when the animated series introduced Harley Quinn. That just started out as someone saying, hey, what if we gave the Joker a female sidekick? And now look at her. You might say we've got too much Harley Quinn these days. But the point is, introducing a new character can pay off. So, introduce some new monsters here. The Polygon trilogy didn't really deliver on that front. Sure, they had the Servum, which came in the worm form and the bird form, but by the midway point of the second movie, they were basically forgotten. They didn't matter anymore. They only served any sort of function in the first movie, Planet of the Monsters, and it was a role that technically could have been filled by any kind of creature. The Servum could have worked, but they were ultimately a waste of time. They didn't do anything with them. You have an opportunity here to come up with new monsters that you can do something with. And I recommend both coming up with new monsters and not squandering the opportunity. So that's my criteria. Ultimately, all I want is a good story. You can make it thematically complex or not. I don't care. I just want a good story. Right now we've only got the 3 images, one of which is a title logo. And sure, it looks like an improvement, and I really hope it is. But visuals are only part of it. We need substance. Not necessarily deep thematic navel-gazing substance, but we still need substance. Just give us a good story. Give us a good story and we will have our faith restored, or at least I will. Anyway, those are my thoughts, and I'm sure you have yours as well, so leave them in the comments. You know the drill. Until such time as we meet again, this is the OmniViewer signing off.
If you enjoyed this video, you know what to do. Like and subscribe, then go down to the description to find links to follow us on DeviantArt, Patreon, and Twitter. While you're there, you'll also find the Amazon links for the original novels Operation Red Dragon, The Daikaiju Wars Part 1, and The Occult Mafia. 2 books I think you'll really enjoy. Thank you all, and we appreciate your support.